So I'm Shahir. I used to work in the founders program, but so I spent roughly the last 3 years there. Um, I also run a content marketing company, so I do a lot of this professionally as well. Even before the founders program, I was involved in doing the pitch coaching for the PFC. So I've been involved in the PFC for the last probably 4 or 5 years now. So I've seen the judging criteria kind of develop. Obviously, worked with all the judges along the way. Um, Helped run a lot of the pitch coaching sessions, and basically a lot of the pitch coaching advice that I'll give you is pretty much specific to the PFC. So I don't know what kind of level of experience you have. This is really weird for me. All my pitch clinics have always been kind of in person, so it's super interactive. People throw their hands up, just jump in. I want you to just do that. If I can't actually see you, because I can only see about 8 of you at the moment, just drop your question in the chat thread, and we can address it there. Hey Mel. So what I'm going to do is just basically start assuming you haven't pitched a startup before, and then if it's just too basic, drop me a message in the chat, or ask me a specific question that would make it more interesting for you, and I'll just try to address everything that I can. But I'm going to start by just doing a really basic introduction to pitching on the whiteboard. And then we'll think about some of the judging criteria specific to the PFC. And then I'll run you through some slides that I have prepared previously, just of a very generic kind of pitch deck, and what sorts of slides typically exist and what goes on the different slides. Just one thing to confirm, roughly how long do we have, Laura? Is it an hour or an hour and a half, or?
You've got up to 2 hours.
Up to 2 hours. Okay. So we'll just see how we go, but I'll keep my kind of theoretical component down to 20 minutes or half an hour at most. And then please, let's have as much Q&A as possible. This is a really welcome diversion from me with the whole family at home. And there's going to be a 1-year-old around my legs in the next half hour when she wakes up from her nap. So bear with me, please. Okay. So basically, pitching is all about communicating what you're working on to a very diverse audience, right? So there are all kinds of different audiences that we pitch to. Some startups need to pitch to potential customers. Obviously, you pitch what your product is and hope that they will buy it. Or if you don't have a product yet, that they will trial it or express interest in trialing it. You want to pitch to potential suppliers and partners. Maybe you need something, part of your supply chain that you're not able to produce in-house, that you'd like given to you, very preferential rates, and you need to pitch for that sort of support. You need them to be on board as a potential supplier or partner of you. Or maybe they're going to be a distribution partner, so they've got a huge readership on their media platform, or a huge audience of loyal followers, and you just want them to push out a message for you as a startup. You want them as a kind of promotional partner. Or maybe you're pitching to a regulator. Lots of startups operate in legal gray areas. There's the occasional outright illegal startup. They say they're innovating. What do? They pitch to regulators. So sometimes you've got to pitch to a regulator to create a regulatory framework for you. So for example, you're a fintech startup. You're operating in the equity crowdfunding space. I was involved in a startup called Venture Crowd for a while, a couple of years ago. And we actually needed to kind of lobby the government to enable non-wholesale investors, so not just rich investors, to be able to invest through the platform. And you may have seen those announcements that eventually came out around retail investors being allowed to invest on equity crowdfunding platforms. Sometimes you've got to pitch to a regulator. But the most common pitch is to potential investors, right? But that's not necessarily true of the PFC. So when we're pitching to potential investors, obviously some different information goes in there. It gets like really sensitive, and we talk about financial data and forecasts and how we hope to do over the next 2 to 3 year period. But when we're pitching to PFC judges, sometimes we're communicating different things. Because the PFC is an early stage ideas competition, right? It's about that innovation. It's about that human-centered problem. So you've discovered a real problem that somebody has. You've developed an innovative solution towards that problem. And ideally, you've got the most traction towards solving that problem. So, the PFC has always been a pitching competition. It's about public speaking ability and being able to communicate yourself really well. But beyond that, it's always been a traction competition. It's not just having a really nice human-centered idea and lots of evidence that lots of people need it. It's about actually trying to do as much as you can in terms of prototyping it, getting it into people's hands, or doing the clickable demo if it's a tech product, getting as far as you can with it in a realistic sense, like actually thinking about it as a real business, and trying to get it into people's hands. So, you know, we judge traction in many different ways in terms of actually developing the product, actually having the thing. And I think, you know, for those who are working on physical products and tangible things, I think they often have an advantage when it comes to pitching events, because people like tangible items. So you've got the thing sitting on the table next to you, and it's just all feeling very real. It's something you can look at and touch and approach afterwards and engage with. And, you know, we have to think about, for all the non-physical products, what is it that we can say that makes our pitch feel just as real, just as realistic, just as tangible? And you've really got to ask yourself that question, because a tech product, you know, it's not feasible to necessarily complete on this time frame. So what sort of things could you be saying that actually make it feel that real? For example, letters of intent from a potential customer. Like if it's an enterprise customer, you've got an email from them saying they would love to use it. If it's a potential supplier or partner, they've, you know, and you were asking them for that preferential treatment that I was talking about earlier, well, they've expressed an interest in doing that. Or maybe what you were able to do was actually spin up a really quick MVP, a one feature product that actually solves one part of the problem, and you were able to get that into people's hands and actually have users sign up for it. I mean, that is an example of really strong traction as well. But if it's something much more complicated, if it's a health tech, if it's a medical product, if it's something that's going to take 6 years and $10 million to commercialize, and you've got to get approval from the TGA and all sorts of regulatory hoops to actually jump through, well, what does traction look like in that case? I mean, it could be research. It could be having spoken to people in the industry about what solutions exist and having received their real feedback about why your product is needed. It could be having brought on a technical advisor, somebody who has developed similar products, to advise you on how to take something like that to market. So whatever it may be, one of the most important elements of a PFC pitch is definitely traction, right? But as we spoke about, it's really weird, guys, not being able to see a lot of you or hear any of you. It's really weird. I feel like I'm talking into the abyss. Guys, you've got to ask me some questions on the chat thread. Please help me. In terms of pitching, there are many structures, and structures are really useful and really important because they keep you on track. Ultimately, in my view, and feel free to push back or ask me questions, but in my view, there's no way a startup founder needs to be using notes or palm cards or anything like that to pitch something that they're so passionate about and in love with, right? So we've really got to, thank you, Ashby. We've really got to figure out exactly what we're talking about, so that we can almost master that content quickly enough that we're almost just able to stand up and speak. It looks like it's off the cuff, but the practice is actually the effort you've been putting into that business over those weeks, right? So once you've mastered the content, which is absolutely your intention, pitch development could look like you just standing up and speaking. You know, try the pitch 5-6 different times, see what different words fall out, see how sentences are constructed differently each time. Eventually, through that iterative process, you're going to arrive at a pitch. But if you need palm cards or a script to be able to stand up and speak in the first place, well, that's going to hinder you a lot. So what we want to do is really get comfortable with just speaking off the cuff. And I know it's weird to say that on a Zoom call where all of your mics are turned off and none of you are allowed to. But what I do want to see throughout this call, we're going to try to get some people volunteering to speak about their own startup, especially once they've had a chance to speak about some different structures and introduce some different ideas for you, right? So in terms of a startup structure, if you can see this, so I'll give you a very basic one. It's called the Gaddy pitch. So you may have heard of this. Anthony Gaddy is a marketer, he's a marketing guru based in Melbourne, and he developed a pitching structure that has been very useful to the startup community over the last decade. It's been very popular, and it comes in 3 parts. So it's sorry, screwed it up on the first letter. Here we go. You know how these are leading sentences. So it's an element of scripting. It's especially good for, you know, really kind of inexperienced pitches. It's a really great way to get confident and just practice. You know how, and then what you're going to talk about here is the problem. The 3-sentence pitch structure. It's called an elevator pitch structure. So the idea is if you got into the ground floor of an elevator with your dream investor, by the top floor, you know, you've convinced them because you've used a structure like this. So you know how problem, what we do, solution, and then in fact, and then this is usually some element of traction. And although it's not included in the structure, what you want to always do and remember is to have an ask, right? So you know how problem, what we do is solution. In fact, traction and an ask. So what are you trying to be? You're trying to communicate very quickly the problem space you're in, the solution that you've been working on, and presumably there's some problem solution fit. So I'm going to talk about how you can interweave some traction throughout everything you do. And then the third step is, in fact, and this is where you can be explicit about it. In fact, we just signed up our first 1,000 users is a good way of demonstrating problem solution fit, right? So that's why that third step is the way it is. And then you always want to tack on an ask, because if you've just signed up 1,000 users, well, that person listening to you is probably willing to part with something, whether it's a contact or some advice or a bit of money. So we have to remember that one of the key things that separates pitching from any other public speaking format is that it's a persuasive exercise, and therefore you've got to ask for something, because the greatest measure of a pitcher's success is whether you get what you ask for. But we're going to look at other measures of a pitcher's success as well, because we can't all win the PFC. So how do we know that we had a good pitch? We're definitely going to cover off some of those success metrics, ways you can judge the success of a pitch. So right now, what I want is for a volunteer from the audience to please, oh, a question. Perfect, we're going to come back to that. What I need just before that is, sorry Shay, what was the guy's name who developed this? Anthony Gaddy. So it's the Gaddy pitch. I think that's Gaddie. Does traction have to be a completed product, or ideas on how we can potentially make the technology but need more funding or research? Yeah, so we're going to cover that throughout this talk. Traction is a variety of things. As I said, it doesn't have to be a completed product. It's the very best that you can do at the time with the resources that you have. As I said, if you're commercializing a medical technology product and it's going to take 6 years and $10 million or 10 years and $6 million, well, you know, you're certainly not going to bring it to the final night of the PFC. But what can you bring to the final night? It's letters of intent, it's research, it's clinical trials, it's, you know, human guinea pigs volunteering to put your thing on their body. I don't know what it is. That's a weird thing to say. But bottom line, traction is the best thing you can do at the time. And so, yeah, there are 1,000 different answers to that, and I'm sure we're going to hit on a lot of them throughout this talk. Okay, so what I need, as I said, what I need is for somebody to tell me what they're working on. You could try to structure it like this, or you could just tell me what the product is. What I'd actually prefer is for somebody to just say what the product is, and that way I can demonstrate how you might apply this structure to it. And then some very, very important takeaways are going to fall out of this, and how I approach each sentence. So at the risk of being left hanging, can someone please just describe in one sentence the product that they're working on? The structure of the pitch, Jerry, is what we're going to go through. I've actually got a whole example with me that I prepared, and we'll go through it after this little whiteboard session. So I need somebody to tell me their gadget, their widget, their product, their brilliant idea, whatever it may be, their tech marketplace, their tutoring startup. Rodrigo, you've got to stay on point here, buddy. Well, I want to know what your product is. Thank you, Donna. Go for it.
All right, I'll unmute myself. So our product that I'm working with Dan is, we want to build a smartphone app that helps everybody get access to personal financial advice. So we want to provide unbiased advice and make it cheaper for everybody.
Okay, perfect. All right, thanks very much for that, Donna. So here we go. That's really good. And especially in this context too. All right. So you know how financial data is just really complicated, exclusive, it's wordy, PDSs are not written in a way that is meant to be read. The financial markets have been so complex for so long. There was even a royal commission into it. And now that we've got, 2 million unemployed people because of coronavirus, you know how it's really hard to access useful, accessible financial information that applies to your personal situation, so that you can actually get ahead in life? Well, what we do is we've developed an app, a mobile app that can connect you with an advisor in your local area who understands your personal situation. They're going to be able to visit you, except not anymore. They're going to do it all over Zoom. We've developed a system where you can be connected with highly rated, highly trusted, fully credentialed, licensed, post-royal commission, people who haven't been sued out of existence, financial advisors who can get you back on the right track, even in this really difficult economic environment right now. In fact, we've just signed up our first 100 financial advisors. We've checked, we've done the full background check. We know that they survived the Royal Commission, that they haven't been sued out of existence. We know that they've got all their credentials, their licensing, their insurance. In fact, we've collected at least 10 testimonials from each of them. And we know that they're, on average, they're scoring a 4.8 out of 5-star rating. And on top of that, we've got 200 people on our waiting list who are just dying to have this product, in their hands so that they can really get ahead of this coronavirus thing and take care of their personal finances and get through this intact. Okay, so, that must have been the world's tallest building, because I did not get through that in an elevator ride, right? That was long, but I did that deliberately. Basically, you can do a 1-sentence response to each thing. You know how financial information is not written to be consumed. You know how inaccessible and difficult it is? Well, what we do is we absolutely decode all of that. We have plain English information on all the different asset classes, all the different financial strategies, so that you can really pick and choose what works for you. And in fact, we've just signed up our first 3 financial planning organizations that are going to provide this initial content and just help get the platform going before we can start crowdsourcing the content more widely once we've got our vetting system in place, right? So it could be a 3-sentence response to each thing. But I did it long just to introduce some different ideas. I was talking about some of the big players. I was talking about the big banks. I was introducing some villains. So often startups, they're the knight in shining armor to the big lumbering, villain, the incumbent, the bank, who has deliberately misled us for this long. They deliberately misled us for so long that there was a royal commission into them. And that's an important second point. So like a story, I'm introducing some different characters. We've got the hero, which is us. We've got the villain, which is the bank. We've got proof that they're a villain because there was a royal commission, but the royal commission does something else. It shows that this whole pitch is very contextually relevant. It's very timely. One of the most important questions of any pitch is why now? If I'm an investor and I need to part with money, well, why should I do that now? Anything in any aspect of your pitch that makes it seem more timely, more contextually relevant, the better. So I tried to throw in the coronavirus thing as well, but I probably could have stopped at the Royal Commission thing. But I threw in 2 kind of timely news pieces there to try to make it seem more relevant. So we've got characters, we've got heroes, we've got villains, we've got contextual factors that make the whole pitch seem relevant and timely, and we've got some principles around accessibility, equity, fairness, right? It's not fair that these villains have been, writing cryptic information for so many years, so only their buddies in the super funds can get rich. Do you know what? This is what we're doing. So we're introducing the principles that we actually hold dear as a team. We as a team, clearly, without having said that, because you'll never say this, you'll never say we as a team hold dear the idea of fairness, equity, accessibility. But from your very first sentence, those are the themes that you're talking about. Do you know what I mean? So you're also building a connection with the person from the very first, sentence that you're talking about. So we've introduced elements of storytelling. We've introduced our own personal beliefs, and we've led into what the product actually does. Now, I've been rambling for so long, I forgot what I said about the what we do step. But, if you remember, look for the different items that were there. So I probably did describe some features, but I was probably also linking it back to principles, like how that makes things more fair, more easy, more accessible, more equitable. So that sort of thing. You don't want to dwell too long. One of the really important takeaways of the Gaddy pitch, if you look at it, is that the solution definitely comes after the problem, right? Like most startup pitches. And that's because the problem is where you establish the story, where you establish the characters, where you establish your personal beliefs, and where you show that this is a problem affecting a lot of people, right? In fact, if I wanted to make that opening more emotive, I could talk about all the retirees who are being wiped out due to the stock market crash. I could talk about so many different things. I could introduce more characters and show that it's an even more human-centered problem, right? And so that is, I'm dwelling on this because it's one of the key things about the PFC. One of the key things about the PFC is to show that this is a human-centered problem. It's a real thing. Lots of people are experiencing this. It's unfair. They're being taken advantage of. There are bad actors out there. And clearly we're the person who believes in fixing this, right? But the important takeaway is that the problem comes first, because a lot of people, when pitching innovations, make the mistake of just going straight into the product. So especially if you're a CTO, if you're the tech person or you're a maker and it's a physical product, all you really want to talk about is your handiwork, the thing you love, the aspect that, you know, keeps you working through the night, which is the actual thing, the product. But we also have to remember, and this is also very important for the PFC, is that this pitch is not, there's a reason it's important to dwell on this point. It's not just an ideas pitching comp. Therefore, we want to hear your idea. No, the most compelling idea is one that could actually be commercialized, which means you have to pitch the whole business or structure or organization or whatever it may be that wraps around that product. And this is commercialization. It doesn't matter if you're a charity or a social enterprise or whatever it may be. However you have structured the organization that puts the idea in people's hands, that whole supply chain, it all has to be pitched, right? So one of the mistakes that a lot of startup entrepreneurs make is just pitch the thing they love, which is the idea of the product. But when somebody just hears a product, without having established that personal connection first, this is me, this is what I believe in, this is why we're doing this, people tend to get argumentative. Oh, that won't work. You missed this feature. I think you're spending too much time on this feature. They try to pick problems with the idea or flaws in the product. But if you achieve the personal connection first, if you show the evidence that proves a lot of people had this problem, because, hey, we interviewed 100 people. Imagine a PFC pitch for you, Donna, where you're like, I actually interviewed 30 retirees in the lead up to PitchFest. I know that's a big ask. And discover.
We got 100 responses, actually.
How many?
We've already spoken to 100 people.
Okay,
yeah.
So it's not a big ask at all. That's amazing. That's a beautiful example of evidence. So having received 100 survey responses or done 100 interviews or whatever it may be, that's a huge sample size. It starts to be statistically significant, and people are going to be compelled by that. So it's proof that there is a real problem, and you're a human-centered thinker, a designer, and that's where you started. So again, the Gaddy pitch, you know how: problem, what we do, solution, and then in fact, traction. I've struggled with traction slides. So whenever I do pitch coaching, I think that the traction slide is misunderstood. So I just want to go through my impression of it and ask me questions or push back if you disagree. But basically, you shouldn't take the inclusion of a traction slide to mean that's where all of your traction goes, right? Because every slide has associated traction. If you leave all your traction for the traction slide, that's going to mean, and a lot of people do this, right? And this is why I'm dwelling on it. It's going to mean that the rest of your pitch is feeling very theoretical. We think the problem is this, we think the solution is this, the market size is this, et cetera, et cetera. It's all very theoretical. And then at the end, right, after I've been speaking for 15 minutes, I find out from Donna that she's spoken to 100 people, right? I needed to know that first. So I'm not criticizing you, Donna. My point is, if you leave, hey?
Oh, we're all learning. It's okay.
No. I'm not even criticizing you at all. My point is, a lot of people do actually leave the traction for the end. And by then, your audience is switched off. They're either thinking this won't work, I've seen this done better, I could do this better. They don't realize how far you've taken it, how serious it is. So traction needs to come through in almost everything that you say. If you say the problem is this, it's because you spoke to 100 people and you discovered that the problem is this. This is what we mean by validation, right? This is what we mean by lean startup methodology. Everything you think, everything that you would say as an idea is a hypothesis, right? If you say something in your pitch and you didn't run an experiment to validate it, then you're running the risk of that sentence not being persuasive. But of course, we have to prioritize our battles, and we can't test every hypothesis. So you have to think about what are generally accepted statements, things that people would generally agree with. It doesn't need much further proof, right? Versus things that need proof. When you're going to make outlandish statements as a startup founder, you better have some evidence to back that up. Otherwise, it's just a theoretical statement. And any half-good public speaker could come and pitch your idea just as well or better if you're not there going, this is the actual work we did. These are the letters that people have signed. These are the customers that we've brought on board. These are the people on the wait list. These are the respondents to our surveys. So all these examples of traction need to be peppered throughout your pitch so that everything feels compelling, everything feels validated, everything feels a bit more defensible, and people are being persuaded. Now then, if you agree with that, in that context, what goes on the traction slide? Well, I would leave on the traction slide your most recent or most compelling win. So for example, you might see some people have all their media clippings on that slide, all the news articles that have been cut out or screenshots of their TED talk or whatever it may be. You might do that. You might see just user acquisition. They've got like an exponential curve. Their user acquisition, it looks like coronavirus, right? Maybe you want to put that on your traction slide. You know, so the single most compelling thing, a big visual, something that will really stick with them, or something which is relevant at that point in the pitch. So in my example, you'll see an example of that, where what might actually go on the traction slide, bearing in mind that every part of the pitch needs to have traction through it. Rodrigo's in. So app for patients with low back pain. We'll provide an app for health system and general practitioners. Okay. So obviously I don't know what it actually does, but just to very quickly tear through it, I have lower back pain because of an old ski injury. And now that Alana's heavier, it flares up now and then. So maybe I'll be a customer for you, Rodrigo. App for patients with low back pain. Okay, so you know how lower back pain is a debilitating condition. It can absolutely have you on the couch or the floor for a day. It affects your productivity. It affects your emotional state. You're in pain, essentially. And a lot of people with lower back pain, you know, maybe a chronic condition, and it's just absolutely miserable. Well, a lot of people are experiencing it. In fact, we discovered that 75,000 Australians are living with chronic back pain. Now, what we do is we've developed an innovative, here we go, I have to make something up, don't I? An innovative app that is populated by local physiotherapists, and they basically put in daily micro exercises that you can do from home to stretch out your back, so that when you're lying on the couch, you're lying on the floor, you're not just lying there wallowing in your own misery, you're at least stretching it out, doing some micro movements, every day a different thing, and being rewarded for actually following through. Because one of the biggest problems with physiotherapy is daily compliance. We can't trust a person to go home and actually do these exercises that we set. They go home, they do it for a day, and then they forget. It's like a motivational speech. It's a burst of motivation and then nothing. But unfortunately, the only way to combat chronic back pain is to do daily things. So what our app does is it gives you these achievable daily micro tasks, rewards you for your compliance, and keeps you on track with your physiotherapy plan. In fact, we just signed up our first physiotherapy network, which brings us 100 different authors to produce the content. We're going to film videos with them, and we've got 900 people on our waiting list waiting for us to go live, which we're going to do on the 1st of July, right? So, Rodrigo, I don't know what your solution is, but basically, in this case, there weren't so much, you know, heroes and villains. I think the villain was our own human nature and not being able to comply with any sort of homework ever. So, you know, you don't want to delve into that too much, otherwise it gets too hurtful for the audience member. But instead we focused on how big the problem is and how debilitating the problem is. So you're not productive, you're not working, you're on, well, these days no one is, so that's okay. But we focused on the size of the problem and how significant it is. And then the solution, obviously, we made it sound real. We spoke about the principles behind it. So microtasks, it means we can comply. It means we're actually going to follow through. It means we can get this health benefit. And in fact, obviously, we've signed up some content producers. We've signed up some users. There's clearly a movement behind us. Now, I want to just dwell quickly on users and waiting lists. It's probably the best example of traction, whether you're a physical product or a digital platform. If you've built it, do you have customers? Have you sold any? If you haven't built it, who's waiting for it? So how big is the waiting list? How many people are on it? There's no excuse for not having a landing page with an email capture with 600, 900, 1,200 people on it. When is the Pitch Fest, by the way? Can somebody just type that into the group? I should know this. Maybe not by the Pitch Fest, but maybe by the finals. Okay. So this is the Gaddy pitch, 21 to 23. Oh, plenty of time. Okay. So all you growth hackers, get your landing page up by the end of today. Get some good copy on there and some high-res images, free from unsplash.com, and do this thing. If no one's bought it, who is waiting? One of the most important questions you have to ask yourself. Remember that this is a commercialization exercise. It's not just an ideas competition. So yes, you need to have an innovative idea, but if you have no mechanism for getting that idea into manufacturing, into the distribution channel, into users' hands, then yeah, it's just an idea. So traction is the thing that's going to combat that perception that what you're working on is just an idea. And I would say, not to be unkind, that would be the default setting, right? This is an early stage ideas pitching competition. The default setting is you've just come up with this to win a prize. You come out firing with this whole solution, right? That actually takes it from your head into users' hands. You've got proof that people want it. You've got the whole supply chain set up. That is impressive. That is going to obviously stand out in the judge's eyes. And why not? Like, life doesn't end at the PFC. You can take it into the founders program and launch it as a startup. There's a question here. Does that mean we have to contact manufacturing companies on the budget and things like that? So we're supposed to build the whole thing now? Okay, so no. Horses for courses, guys. I know that everybody's in different situations. I know that some of you are working on medtech. I know that some of you are working on a tutoring marketplace. I actually don't know that. I'm just coming up with examples. If you're working on a tutoring marketplace, the whole marketplace better be up and running by the comp to be persuasive. If you're working on a medical technology startup, well, just having a provisional patent discussion with a patent attorney is going to be quite persuasive. And to have done that research and found that there aren't similar patents is going to be very persuasive. So for some people, it's just research. For some people, it's, serious action. It depends on the scope, complexity, and innovative nature of the idea. What is feasible on this time frame is what you should be thinking about, and then making sure that you do as much as is feasible. I know that it can be impossible to build the whole thing, especially when I don't know what you're working on. As I said, you've got to do what you're able to do. Assess what you think is feasible on the timelines that exist. And all I'm encouraging you to do is to push yourself to go further, a little further than you thought maybe you would have. And if you can talk to manufacturers, if you can talk to patent attorneys, if you can talk to potential users or customers, whatever it may be, do what you can. The Pitch Fest is in about 3 weeks. Okay. Yeah, wireframes, absolutely. Why not? Balsamic, mock-ups. I don't know what your skill levels are like, but these are like no-code tools. You could check out InVision app. You could check out Microsoft Paint. Still one of my favorite software platforms. Use it almost every day. All right, so I'm not being glib there, but what I'm saying is really assess based on your own product what is possible and whether you can get something done, and then just push for it, because the thing that is the most persuasive in this competition is real world evidence that the thing is needed, that the thing will work, that you can build the thing, and that you've taken some serious steps towards it. Let's put it that way. Let's just frame traction that way. It's serious steps towards the actual development of your product, look, take it in stages. If you can get that far, great. If you can only validate that the problem space exists, then great. But do your best work in whatever you need to do. Okay, or whatever you're able to do. So I'm just going to switch over. The Gaddy pitch is altogether too simplistic to include everything that you need it to include. You are going to need way more headings. So in a previous presentation, I did have some. I could always send you those headings, but I think they're also in my example. So I'm just going to switch over to this pitch deck example. Are there any other questions before we move on? No, okay. So sharing another screen now. All right. So basically, I'm just going to get that chat thread back up. Okay. Yes, I find a little conflicting. All right. Learnomics. Feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn and we can sort this out. All right. Actually, everybody feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn. But I'm not giving you one-on-one advice. Okay. So you can see this deck is very bright, trying to keep us all awake. It was done on Canva. So Canva is a beautiful tech tool. I'm sure you've heard of it by now. Again, non-designers. So there are platforms for non-coders to build whole products now. If you look at things like Webflow, Zapier, you know, where's Chris when you need him? Airtable, all sorts of things you could actually develop without any code. In terms of just showing us designs, so many more things, mockups, Balsamic, Adobe XD, whatever it may be, all great. You know what? A lot of the ideas could probably just be communicated on a landing page, a Squarespace landing page, WordPress, Weebly, Unbounce, Instapage, whatever it may be. Get something done, especially if you plan on doing it as a business beyond the PFC. All right, so let's show you some actual slides. So some actual slides look like this. My product isn't actually a product. I'm just talking about different things that you include on slides. So I recommend Canva because it forces you to use very few words per slide. It forces you to use large high-res images, nice colors, font matches, you know, color combinations. It's just very helpful in making something look fundamentally good enough. And, you know, you don't want to be using PowerPoint templates or anything like that in this day and age. Having said that, like I am definitely not rating my own presentation work here. So these colors may be visually jarring and difficult for you. Please don't judge me too hard. We've got a title slide to start with. So this would be your startup name, logo, and maybe a tagline of what you do. While this slide is up, you're probably starting to tell your problem story and maybe starting to establish the situation, the context, and some of those characters, the villains to your heroes and what have you. But then at one point you want to land on something really emphatic and really emphasize it. That could be this slide. So it could be, and the next 3 slides are different versions of this slide. It depends on how you want to approach it. So for example, 1,000 people have this problem. It could be that you spoke to 1,000 people. It could be 1 in 10. It might be 7 in 10. Whatever it may be, you could use a number or a statistic or a ratio or something like that to show that this thing is significant. So if it's surprising, if it's jarring, it's going to start to generate curiosity. If it's also a really emotional subject, it's going to start to generate sympathy. Either way, our audience is starting to feel things and they're going to respond better to our pitch as a result. So especially if they're feeling things that they fundamentally agree with as well. So if you're starting to talk about principles like fairness and equity, and they stand for those things too, you're also achieving a personal connection with those people, which is one of the most important things in any pitching format to set out to do. And especially like you're being genuine. These are things you genuinely believe in. And if they do too, you're going to achieve a connection over that. Another way to represent this information could be like a chart. And of course, if you don't have this footer or this title, like that could just be full screen. The chart in this case shows, I think it's the proportion of people living on under $1 a day or $2 a day. So it's like you can see, you know, the main hotspots in the world. It may be as you expected. It may be surprising that it's so widespread when you see it visually like this. And again, like surprise, curiosity, sympathy, a call to action almost without saying anything. So if you can express the problem this way, that could be really interesting for you as well. And here you're going to be absolutely talking about principles like the safety of these people, the fairness that the world is, the unfairness that the world is like this, or the responsibility on us in blue to do something for everybody else. And especially in this context, like I think we're moving towards a more altruistic phase, you know, of the pandemic, for example, with countries sharing resources and you know, hopefully that trend continues. But you know, people might be pretty open to this sort of message right now, the idea that we should help others. So, and this one is just like, if you don't have a chart, if you don't have big numbers, how about a nice big high-res image? This startup could be about workforce automation. So workforce automation is a huge problem, and maybe some of you are working on it. This cute little guy is coming for your job, you might say. You might say that all of our most low-skilled jobs are being disrupted by robots and technology, making technology entrepreneurs wealthy, but displacing the vast majority of the global workforce who work in low-skilled jobs. So, for example, that could be a really compelling way to start. It's like, and you're tapping into some really interesting themes about automation and the role of technology versus humanity, and who we should be backing, and who you support as a startup, you know, could achieve a really interesting connection with the audience. And then I generally go into benefits. So when you've expressed a problem and you've clearly shown, you know, this is the thing that you're working on, it helps to then go, okay, let's specifically look at what if we could deliver blah, blah, blah. You know, what if we could give people back their time? What if we could help them grow? What if we could help them? What if we could build esteem and respect of other people? So what have I chosen here? I've chosen some motives that drive a lot of people, right? So people want their time back. People like to grow. They like personal development. They got a growth mindset. They like to be recognized by other people. So think about, like, why do we buy things? And why would a customer of your ultimate product buy it? What would it do for them? So this is again about human-centered design and thinking about the user, customer development, really thinking about who they are, having a sense of empathy with them. What do they need? What do they want? And what do we give them? Notice that we're not giving them features. A sales coach might say people don't buy features, they buy benefits, right? So they buy a change in their life as a result of the product. That's what they're buying, not the product. So for example, if the productivity tool can give you more time, what they're buying is more time with their family, more time to work on their own business, more time to be profitable, more time to be so many other things. What they're buying from you is time, but they don't really, like, how much do they really care about the functions of your particular productivity tool? That comes at a later stage of the buying decision, and therefore a later stage of your pitch, right? So at this stage of the pitch, just after you've talked about the problems and really emphatically, this is what we believe in, this is what we're working on, we talk about, these are the things we stand for. These are the things we want to give back to people. And it's another really compelling segue into what comes next. So time is an example. Growth is an example. If you're a learning and development startup, if you give out small digestible training videos that people can watch on the way to work or on the way back from work, you're all about personal growth and development. You're helping people with their careers and their advancement and their progression and their opportunities in life. What is the content of those videos? What are the topics that you cover? Again, it comes later. You'd need to connect with them first on, this is the space we work in. Or esteem, like if you're working on an electric car, you know, Tesla. There were other electric cars, but Tesla put some time into making it look good and be luxurious, look good, feel good. It's not what people were expecting electric cars to be after, you know, years of science fiction and comedy. And I don't know if any of you are Simpsons fans, but that skit comes to mind about, I'm an electric car, I don't go very far or very fast. So electric cars have been made fun of for years, right? But Tesla comes out and puts some time into actually making it look good, and feel good and be something that a whole mix of people would buy. So what are you buying now when you drive a Tesla? It's not just that you're helping the environment, it certainly is, but it's also that you feel good about yourself. You're buying maybe self-esteem, or you're turning heads on the street. It's their esteem. It's like any other car now. If you were in the market for a high-end car, you're probably being driven by stuff like esteem and attention, as well as the other benefits that a car like that can bring, right? So these are some of the principles that drive human behavior. And there are many, many others. Connection. All social media startups. You want to pitch any social media startup, any communication startup, this startup, Zoom, it's about connectivity. So the ability to be, you're in my home now. It's super weird. But we're connecting and you're hopefully gaining some value. Connectivity and growth. Costing you time though, but we're 2 out of 3, so it's good. These benefits are what I'm bringing you in this very session, or what Zoom has brought you in this session. So connectivity is a principle that underlies all of those different tech platforms. And it's a good place to start. So money would be another one. There'd be many, many other ones. At the most fundamental level, people are generally trying to achieve some sort of pleasure or avoid some sort of pain. And then a lot of these examples that I've given you, which are a little more practical than that, because you don't want to just come out and say we're a startup that seeks to cause pleasure. These are a little more practical, but they're ultimately, they're either ways of gaining pleasure or avoiding pain. All of them, really. So, question for you. I don't know if this is going to work in this format, but why do we cover benefits before product? I alluded to this before. Does anyone want to answer? Donna, can you answer?
Yeah, sure. Here I am, back on my island. You were saying earlier that the problem with leading with the product is that someone can always go, well, why weren't you? This feature is missing, or why didn't you do that? But having the benefits there is triggering more of an emotional response. So then people go, oh yeah, that sounds pretty reasonable. And then you bring the product out. It's like, oh yeah, that's what I wanted.
Exactly right. And it may not be that you've actually addressed any of their concerns, but what we're going for here is having achieved a connection, just a more constructive mindset. So again, this is beyond the PFC. I'm thinking about an investor pitch, right? If you come out firing with the product and they don't like it, or they spot flaws, they're going to fire back with the flaws. But if you achieve a connection and then pitch the product, their language may change to this. It may change from, oh, but you missed, and become, I really like where you're coming from, but have you considered? And that first part, I really like where you're coming from, that's these benefits. And it's also the beliefs that you expressed in the context and problem slides before. So yes, thank you, Donna. And just very quickly, while I have you, what benefits do you aim to offer, do you think?
Straight
off the bat.
In our research, we found that a lot of people really want to understand personal finance better, and it gives them a lot of stress that they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So we want to take that stress away. We want to make people certain about their financial futures. And, if you work hard for your money, then you should have a comfortable life.
Exactly. Okay. So benefits. You could use the term de-stress, or you could, take a positive term like peace of mind, or whatever you want to use. But ultimately, you're trying to give them a sense of peace, that their finances are taken care of, or that they've received good advice. Because most people stress out just not knowing what to do. They've got a share portfolio, no idea what to do. It's stressful. You've given them peace of mind, or confidence, or certainty, or clarity, or anything like that could work.
And I forgot to add also, just to increase their wealth by making better choices for the same amount of effort, they can end up with a lot more at the end of their life.
Great. Yep. That's definitely. So in terms of the comfort, wealth, actually living well, ending up well off, all of those things are really important. So I don't know if you'd encapsulate that in one called money, or something else like security, probably financial security or financial freedom, maybe, that they'd be independently wealthy or have recurring income streams or whatever, and not have to work again. That could be another way of doing that. But I like the other point about knowing what to do. So maybe accuracy, again, certainty, clarity, things like that. These may be some of the benefits that you dwell on in your startup. And yeah, it's probably a bit about giving them time back as well, because they don't have to go and do that research themselves. They know it's coming from an expert. They know it's tailored enough to them. They know it's good advice. They can act on it, etc. So that's really good. Thank you. And then I would generally go into the product after that. So this product is one I'd really like, and it's like a farm to table wine startup. So I can see exactly which grape harvest my wine came from, and I can see some content about the winemaker telling me about it and why it was a good year or a bad year, and I can have an extra experience while I drink wine of an evening. So that's my startup. That may be all I have. So coming back to some of the questions from Learnomics, if all I had by Pitch Fest night was these 3 images because I didn't even have wireframes done, well, that's okay. That's the best I have. So that's what I have. And believe me, there are enough wine drinkers in the audience that I'm going to do okay regardless. So basically do the best that you can with the resources that you have at the time. Just try to go as far as you can. I haven't gone very far, so make this your absolute minimum benchmark. I'd rather see a hand-drawn sketch. I have seen one of the best founders that I know, one of the best enterprise salespeople I've ever met, walked into like a sales meeting with Telstra, I think it was, and just drew his idea in a scrapbook with a permanent marker. Like he drew his wireframes in the meeting with Telstra. He nailed it. I mean, that was so that was the best that he could do at the time, and you can still do very well. So communicate this any way that you can. I know that videos won't work with a PDF format. Just don't bother with it. Show us your screenshots, show us your mock-ups, show us a picture of people using the product. Show us anything that is an image, and you'll be a lot safer rather than having issues with video streaming and internet connectivity and all kinds of other issues. So avoid the video, avoid the other things, just make it an image if you can. Last time I ran the PFC, we said no video. This was funny. We said no video. It had to be an image. And so somebody put in a video broken down into images. So you know that a video is just many images sped up. And he actually had 180 slides to make a 3-minute video and just flick through them. So don't get tricky. Don't make a video out of images. Just have an image. There's a whole other business to pitch around the idea in a very short pitch, not just the idea, remember? Okay. So moving on, what generally comes next once you've established the problem, the solution, and remember what I said about traction, guys. So sprinkling traction through every step, please. Not just saying this is what we want to do because I'm a closet alcoholic and I need this wine delivered to me. No, that's not what we're saying here. It's because we went to that many vineyards in the Hunter Valley and found out that some of their lesser known wines were not getting bought up by the big chains. And there's all these other wines that are available that are not being used and wasted, etc. And so what we're doing is proving that there is an amount of supply. And what we're proving is also ideally that there's an amount of demand, because I've thrown up a landing page and 600 people said they'd love that content. They'd love that unknown wine delivered to them. Maybe that'll be my name, Unknown Wines. Anyway. So you get what I'm saying there. Please sprinkle traction throughout every single slide. Market size. So in terms of market size, your traction, your best traction is probably going to be, what's it going to be? Either having done some sort of analysis, most likely it's going to be some sort of secondary research. So it's going to be an IBIS World report or some other industry report. And just as UNSW student, for those who are still UNSW students at any level, through the library, you can access all the databases. So if you don't realize that you have access to IBIS World, you know, corporates are paying thousands of dollars per report and they are all free for you. Please go and see if your startup has the IBIS World report for your industry, and you can quote it. You know, you can put specific numbers there. You can put source IBIS World at the bottom. That is legitimate for you. You have access to that resource, so use it. That is very cool. So Tam, Sam, Tagama, I don't want to spend too much time on the details, but I'm sure resources can be sent around, or you can just Google the difference between total addressable market, serviceable addressable market, target market. There's also another term called serviceable obtainable market. All very confusing. Bottom line, how many people in the whole world have your problem and therefore might be interested in your solution? How many people, as a smaller subset of that, could your startup possibly reach the way it is now? And for digital products, obviously that's still a large proportion of it. But obviously the tech connectivity issues and coverage and what have you may limit it somewhat. And then of that, a smaller subset, who are you proposing to start with? So who are you targeting? And you know, you might segment your customers a whole bunch of different ways. Could be geographically, could be behaviorally, psychographically, demographically, whatever it may be. So it may be that your solution, financial products, is for all retirees and people approaching retirement, but because you're taking a long-term strategic view and you have limited resources, you just want to focus on the people approaching retirement. So it's going to be men and women between 40 and 65, 70, whatever it may be. And then because you're still just a local startup and a lot of your services are being delivered by local financial planners in the Sydney area, it's the subset of those who are currently in Sydney. So for example, that's just kind of total addressable market, total serviceable market, and then target market, you might say, or serviceable obtainable market. So those three numbers are good to have if you can. A red flag would be the market is this big, total addressable market, China. The market for our product in China is this big, and we're going to capture 1% of it, and therefore we're going to be billionaires. That like top-down approach, not ideal. What I'd rather see in terms of a bottom-up approach would be we're starting with this target market, that's this many people, our marketing budget, which we'll talk about later, could help us reach this many of them, and over the years that'll build up to this many users, and then this many users, and then this many users, etc. You get the idea. So a bottom-up approach would be preferable. Just for a break, this is my favorite pie chart. So the point of this slide is to use, hopefully you got that. I can't really see your faces. The point of this is just to use charts where possible, big, high res, nice and clear. Charts are good, images are good. Okay, we're moving on to the competitive section. So here we want to talk about opportunity, right? So if you've come this far in the pitch, you've kind of spoken about the problem and how you know it's real and how many people have it, as in how painful it is. And then you've spoken about your solution and why you think it'll work and almost why you believe it's important. And then you've spoken about the benefits that a solution will bring to the target market and what you stand for. And then you've crossed over into what the product is and how it actually looks or works. Again, subordinate to all that other stuff. Now it stands to reason that we should talk about what the opportunity is. If we get this right, how big is it? How successful could we be? So we started to talk about the market, which is half of that equation. And now we're going to talk about the other players, which is the other half of that equation. So there's no such thing. There's no such thing as we have no competitors. That would be another red flag. So another red flag straight up. So one, earlier I said, we're just going to capture 1% of China. Another red flag would be, we have no competitors. No one else has done this, right? I want you to take a broader view of what competitors are and also include any alternate way of solving the same problem, right? So for example, if you're a transportation company, if you're a local mobility company, if you're a scooter company, bikes are an alternate, cars are an alternate. Any other way of getting around is another alternate, but they're not all scooter companies. So your other scooter companies are your direct competitors, but all your substitutes slash alternatives also need to be considered, right? So any other way that humankind has gone about solving the same problem needs to be considered here. And if it's not, you're looking a bit naive or even deceitful, like you're trying to pretend that there's no other way of doing this and you're the only other way. It almost always comes off as a naive because you simply weren't aware of it. And then think about the argumentative investor who just goes up and goes, hey, nah, you don't know about blah, 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 this many people. And I'm painting them as mean people. They're not mean. They don't want to see you fail. But if you serve them up red flags like this, they're going to give you constructive feedback. Okay, so different ways people communicate their competitive landscape. Remember, including alternatives, ideally, please. One way is perceptual maps. And perceptual maps like this, which is Airbnb's, early pitch deck perceptual map, they take the two different kind of attributes that they think matter. So price and the nature of the transaction in this case. So, online transaction versus offline transaction, probably convenience, we could say convenience, and affordable, expensive, price, we could say. So price and convenience, you could say. Now, the way these work, generally the most attractive position to be in, would be here, the most affordable and the most, you can't see where I'm pointing, but where Airbnb is, funnily enough, the most affordable and the most online, right? The most convenient. Well, that's where every startup puts themselves, in the most attractive position. So is this then the most persuasive way of communicating your competitive landscape? I don't believe so, but a lot of people will do it. So once again, if this is the best that you can do by Pitch Fest night, it's completely fine. It's totally normal. In fact, Airbnb did it and they're doing okay, right? So my point is, if this is the best you can do, do it. The theoretical basis for the perceptual map has an actual rationale of where each item goes. Like in marketing, doing proper research, every item goes at a specific point for a reason. But the way startup founders use it is to put their logo in the most appealing position and then put every other logo on it in other places, right? So what I'm saying is, in the startup context, the default setting is that this is fabricated, right? So if you have proof that you belong in that position because you did the actual research, please share it. If you don't, just remember the default position would be that it's made up. And once again, if it's the best you can do, go with it, because you can't not have something. Another way people do it is feature comparison tables. For me, I prefer the perceptual map because it at least focuses on the benefits. It's customer oriented. It's at least thinking about the price versus the convenience. Whereas this is all product oriented, right? It's just the features of the product that we offer versus other people offer. But once again, what's the default setting? It's completely fabricated because you chose the features that you thought were important because they're the features that you built, right? Oh, and these other world-leading startups don't happen to have these features. Well, we're clearly the best. Like, no, not objective at all. If you have, but once again, the caveat, if you have done the research and 100 people told you that these were the top 7 most important features, this is at least more objective, right? If you got the respondent to rank their features and you said, we surveyed 100 people and we discovered that these were the top 7 features, right? Well, then it's a different thing, because you are somewhat more objectively comparing, and you could do an analysis versus the direct competitors and the substitutes and actually come out on top. That would be very different to this. And remember to pay them credit where they're due. If they do something, acknowledge it. So these are two different ways of presenting the competitive landscape. But I would also say that remembering what those common perceptions are, that these are made up and not objective, you could just have their logos and just talk about them. There's nothing wrong with that. You could just say, these are the main players in the market. You all know who they are. What you may not realize is that these guys have actually dropped the ball somewhat on benefit 1, benefit 2, benefit 3. And those happen to be the top 3 benefits that we focused on. And we know that they're the most important ones to the customer because we interviewed 100 and they consistently came out on top. So in 10 seconds, you've got a sentence to address this slide in a very short pitch, which sounds more compelling than putting up a very biased perceptual map or comparison table, if that makes sense. If that's the best you can do, that's actually very good. Okay, moving on to business model. So business model is how you are going to be commercially viable, right? And I guess I am tending towards for-profit businesses with these examples. But if you're a social enterprise, if you're a not-for-profit, if you're a registered charity, and we've coached all of them in the Founders Program, it's all exactly the same thing. Not exactly the same. You don't have all of the same options available to you, but the principle, remember the principle here is financial sustainability. Therefore, how is a not-for-profit, a social enterprise, or a registered charity financially sustainable? You have to factor in, if you're doing a 1-for-1, your margin is halved. You've got to factor that into your extra sales that you're going to make to do the same as the other shoe company that isn't 1-for-1. Talk to us about financial sustainability, how you propose to survive based on the strategy you're proposing to run. Or the other thing might be, if you're a registered charity, you're relying entirely on donations. Well, that's fine, but you better be the best marketer in terms of, and fundraiser in terms of tapping into those networks, using the latest technology and raising funds, because that's going to be your area of expertise, and it has to be financially sustainable. So how have you got these donors onto a direct debit scheme so that this money is being taken out of their account every month at a smaller amount rather than doing big drives every so often? That's another thing. If you're government funded, well, you've got to talk to us about the funding schemes that you operate under and how they will continue, how they will survive a change of government, that they themselves are financially sustainable. And believe me, it happens. Like, funding sources dry up, and it will be a concern. It'll be a red flag in the audience member. It'll be, this thing doesn't feel financially sustainable. Therefore, you've got to address that up front. Actually, on that, I know we've been talking about these red flags. I just want to just dwell on that just slightly and go, the importance of knowing the red flags in terms of being user-centered when you design your product. Be audience-centered in terms of presenting your pitch. Try to have some empathy with the judges who are going to be your most important audience, and think about the sorts of things that are in their mind. They're going to be looking at you like any other startup, and they're seasoned investors and venture capitalists and what have you, and all sorts of senior people, and they're going to have seen all sorts of projects pitched. So financial sustainability would be one of the most important default questions. One of the best ways you could prepare for this pitch is to make a list of all of the default questions you could possibly think of, and then address them in your pitch. So in terms of prioritizing content, if you can all agree as a team that they will definitely be thinking this in their head, make sure that content goes into the pitch. If you think they may ask it, they may not ask it, and you're running out of time, leave that for question time. But if you can prioritize, it's called matter prioritization. The most important content would be the content that you fully expect the judges to grill you about. That would be the most important content to definitely include in your pitch under these different headings. Okay, so we spoke about returning to business model. We spoke about not-for-profit, social enterprises, charities very briefly. But for all of you for-profits out there, you've generally got subscription models. Are you a freemium model? Are you a SaaS platform? Do they pay $5, $10 a month? Is it free at the initial level and then becomes more expensive? That's a good user acquisition strategy, which will be important later. Do you run ads? Do you sell data? Do you license your technology? Do you have a consulting side income? It's very good for you to just have one or two. It's completely fine. You don't have to have all of these. If you've just got one, that's great. If you've got one and it's been proven, that's the best. right? So somebody has actually parted with money. That would be great. Or expressed an interest to, because you haven't built the product yet, but they've said if this existed, we would use it. A nice little letter of intent email. Very compelling. And it proves that the business model works, because you may have negotiated a price with that enterprise customer and they were willing to put in writing that they would buy it at that price. That means your business model has been validated. Remember how I said every statement you make in your pitch is a hypothesis, and it's preferable to have some evidence backing each statement up, and any other statement is a risk that you choose to run or not run? Well, this is what we're talking about. If you're proposing a business model, right, and you've got one, and you've got a letter of intent that says, yes, I will buy it at that price and in that way, especially if it's a big enterprise deal, that's going to be more compelling than having 3 very complicated, well thought out business model points here, but you never spoke to a human being about them, right? It's going to be far more persuasive to see the one that has an actual customer. So again, do the best that you can, be realistic with your business model, and ideally factor it into what comes next, which is your user acquisition. So once again, I'm going to start going a bit more quickly, just so that we can get, I want to stop at 5:30, and then any Q&A can just continue to happen, and you can all unmute yourselves and just grill me. Launch and growth is all about user acquisition. It's all about marketing. So we spoke about this is a whole solution wrapped around a idea, right? So you've got to pitch the whole solution, and this is the part of that puzzle where you get the solution into people's hands. Actually, it's not just that. Traditional marketing is that covers the supply chain as well, but it's also, here we're really talking about promotional marketing, or what people call growth hacking now, or user acquisition, or whatever it may be. But what we're talking about is actually building demand for the product. We're talking about either having customers or potential customers being interested in it. And how do you do that? How do you build buzz? So a million different ways to do that. And some of them look like starting to run social media campaigns, putting some content out there consistently, blogging once a week about your experience with the PFC. I did my first startup pitching, so it was one of the first founders programs in 2013. And the guy, when I had graduated, and the guy, Bart Jellema was his name, who was a successful serial entrepreneur. He was just like, if you're not already on all the social media platforms, you're wasting your time. Like, be on every social media platform. And this was for an idea we had just come up with. And he's like, if you're not promoting everything, it's not happening. And I'm a terrible person at using social media and self-promoting. So I've always struggled with this. But you in this comp can get a lot of easy wins by starting to blog and make social posts and start to generate some consistent content. It may get picked up, UNSW newsroom, your local paper, that you're these innovators working on this new product in your local suburb. There's scope to actually get some sort of coverage. But more realistically, I think in terms of the PFC, the second and the third points in terms of starting to talk to potential promotional partners. So we're not ready to go big yet. We're not comfortable to go big. We don't have a brand. We don't want to launch it. We don't want to launch all these social media pages. But we do know that this person, this media community or network or whatever, has 2 million readers, and they will put a blog post out for us when we're ready, because we've got that in a little email, a letter of intent from them as a potential promotional partner. That's very compelling. So that, again, that is traction, a proven tactic that could work for you. For PFC pitching purposes, I'd rather than you have a complicated matrix of all your different marketing strategies, and these are our customer personas, and these are the exact strategies and tactics for each one, and fill up a whole slide and terrify us, have 1 or 2 that you've actually got real world traction on. So you say you're going to run a network of promotional partners who will consistently push out your blog posts to their communities of like-minded readers, and you've already got 3 letters of intent. That's great. And we're going to do some social media off the back of that content. And we've already launched our channels, by the way, so that's proven too. And of course, we're an enterprise product predominantly, So we're going to be doing a lot of personal selling. We've had 10 preliminary interviews. We showed them our wireframes. We drew them on a butcher's paper with a permanent marker. And we got a letter of intent from a couple of them too. So I'd rather, again, have fewer ideas and more real world traction rather than lots of ideas and no real world traction. Because one of the most compelling things, in terms of backing up your financials, which if you get this far, would be very impressive. A lot of startups just assume an ongoing or even exponential rate of user growth without any real evidence. So let's say you've got such and such budget. How do you know that? Say you win the PFC prize money, $10,000, and you're going to put $5,000 of that towards marketing because you're going to do this for real. It'd be really cool if back here you had run a user acquisition experiment which showed you could get a user at $2, right? A cost per conversion of $2, right? Amazing. That would be amazing. So we know when you come back here to the financials and you've assumed over the period of that marketing campaign, 2,500 users acquired and converted, right? Because $2 a head conversion, $5,000 marketing budget. That's more compelling, right? Because you've got an experiment to actually prove your cost per conversion. Otherwise, they're going to be like, how did you arrive at that number? And you're like, I'm a startup. We're going to have 20% month-on-month growth. That's how it happens, right? Unfortunately not. Okay, good question here, actually. And I have this question almost every time. Should we assume the 10K prize and say how we'll be using it? I don't think so. I wouldn't. I think it's a tactic people do to be funny. And they're like, and when you give us the 10K prize money, this is how we're going to spend it. I wouldn't do that. What I'd think about is the real needs. Don't assume that you'll win the money. Assume that your startup is going to be real, right? And if your startup is going to be real, what would be the most logical strategic thing to do next? And talk to advisors about that. And then talk to advisors about what that would cost. And then that is your budget, right? You may realize that the next step is going to cost you $50,000 or $1 million or whatever, and $10,000 is a drop in the ocean. You get what I'm saying? So assume it's going to be real, be strategic, and give them the number that is true of you. Don't just be cheeky and say, oh, $10,000 is going to change our lives. It's going to give us everything we need. And, we promise to do it as a real startup. Anyway, and if you do it as a real startup, make sure you talk to Coach and Connect, founders shout out, free coaching service all year round. You're very lucky, UNSW, to have that. Okay, so where are we? In terms of financials, remember, so a projection, and I am wrapping this up in 8 minutes. A projection is one of those things that the audience, even in real startup pitches, okay, if you're at a real pitching event, and you've got a room full of sophisticated investors, and a startup entrepreneur puts their financials on screen, the default assumption, even there, would be that thing is completely fabricated, unless the startup has spoken about all of the assumptions that their financial model is based on. It's based on having this much budget, this much user acquisition. We've got that money secured. The best thing you could possibly see, let's think about ideal world and work backwards. The best thing you could possibly see is this is our revenue curve over the next period. And this was our forecasted revenue curve over the next 2 to 3 years. And this is our actual curve. And it's roughly tracking the same line. Now that would be ideal because you're showing them a forecast and you're showing them real world progress. Now, we may not have that here for the PFC, right? But what we may have is the forecast and proof that some of the underlying assumptions are true. So for example, if a certain level of revenue is just the cost of your product times the amount of users you expect to acquire, right? So you know what the price of your product is. You can assume a certain number of users acquired, and then you can go, this is our revenue curve, right? And assume a growth rate. And that's what most people will do. But remember what we said slightly earlier. If you show that it's based on an actual marketing budget and you just ran this one little experiment to show that your cost per conversion might be X, right? And therefore, if you had this marketing budget, that's the number of users you would times by your price, and your revenue curve even though there's no actual curve, your revenue curve is actually based in some sort of experiment that you actually ran. Even for PFC purposes, that's going to be far more compelling, right? So default assumption is the financial curve, the financial forecast is mostly made up. So show them that you at least ran an experiment. And if you can't model the whole business because it's too hard, you don't know what all your expenses will be, then just do the unit economics. Just go, forget this whole thing. Forget this whole thing and just go, this is the cost of producing one thing. This is, so just show them your price, your RRP, what it sells for, and then show them all of the costs that make up that thing and your margin. That's beautiful too. You know, your financial slide might just be the unit economics of one product. And then they in their head, they can go, okay, so if you sold 1,000, that's a good amount of margin. There seems to be a business there, right? So again, what I'm saying is, don't do things that you've seen, like have a revenue curve because you feel like that's expected in a startup pitch, but you haven't done any experimentation around any of the underlying assumptions. Do something that's actually going to be persuasive. If the best that you could do is the unit economics, because you got quotes through the supply chain of every input that goes into one product, and therefore you know what your margin is going to be, and you can back it up during questioning, you can give hard-hitting, practical, real answers to those questions, it's going to be far more persuasive than putting up something that you feel like you're supposed to include, but you're not prepared to talk to. And then just to go quicker, like a timeline would be basically what comes next in the business, your next priorities, the phases, so product development, launch, you know, post-launch, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. However you want to frame this. I say this every year, but I never update it. Don't have the timeline going from the top to the bottom. It's kind of like a visual representation of how you're going to run this business into the ground. Like have it going from left to right or something. I don't know. Just do something else with this timeline. Go from left to right, or put it on an exponential curve like that, because yeah, that's what it's going to be like. Okay. So have some sort of plan to show them what comes next and make sure it feels realistic to them as well. And then people generally end in team. And this is an example of inconsistent, different approaches. So if it's your first startup and you're in your first year of uni, you know, it's people's formal photos and it's just the best portrait they've ever had taken, or I don't know what it is. But basically what I'm saying is just take a new picture, and preferably with all of you in it, except bearing in mind there's a pandemic on. Perfectly fine to do it this way. Just try to have consistent photos if you can. And then on this slide, you would generally have, like, some people have the logos of the companies that people worked at previously. Some people have their contact details, some dot point greatest achievements that they've ever had. If you don't have many great achievements yet, you could just put the contributions that you make to the business, your specific role in the business as dot points. But this is a very important slide because in terms of that realism, one of those default questions the judge is asking themselves is, how realistic is this? Could this actually happen? And one of the most decisive factors of whether an idea could actually happen is the team that's been wrapped around it. And so you've got to go into detail on the team side. All investors will tell you they're mostly investing in the team. With such early stage businesses, it's way too early to know what's really going to happen. They're mostly investing in the team. You've got to emphasize the team. And in some cases, I just want to make one other point here, that you don't need to be bound to this structure. Again, I would always advise, do what will make your startup, your pitch most persuasive. So for example, we had an unbelievable founder in the last 10x accelerator cohort, which is our accelerator program. And he's manufacturing a heart assist device. So a heart pump that sits, I think, outside your body. So it's a lot less invasive and cost to repair and what have you. I hope I understood that correctly. That's not the point. The point was there was only one alternative on the market, and he was the head of R&D at that company. Like, he was the guy who was responsible for the only alternative. And he told me that at the end of our pitch coaching session. So anyway, my point is, if you happen to be the only person in the world who could possibly do your startup, feel free to put your team slide at the beginning of the pitch. So this is the point that I'm making. Judge the strength of your own pitch at each different stage. Firstly, if you take away nothing else from this talk, take these two things. One, you must have traction on every slide, right? There must be, or not necessarily every slide, but what you verbalize over every slide. Every slide needs to have some sort of traction backing it up. And the other thing is, be flexible with the format. Have a structure to your pitch, but edit it based on what you find most persuasive, having looked at it and having practiced it on different audiences. Find what is most persuasive for you. Yeah, incredible founder that guy was. What an amazing startup. Okay, then nice wrap up. Yes, Rodrigo, everything that I just showed you can be done in 3 minutes. I know it's weird to say that when I've been speaking for about 30, but it can definitely be done on 3. I promise you. Everybody always asks me this. Remember when I gave you that example of the sentence? It was like 10 seconds long. There are only 22 slides here, right? Different, again, weight, the matter. And of course, some of these slides are double ups, right? You probably have less than 15 slides in your final deck, right? Unless you do a frame by frame video production. My point is, time it and make sure you prioritize the content that's most important to you. To finish, make sure you have an ask. An ask is what separates this pitch from every other presentation or public speaking exercise. It's a persuasive medium. You've got to ask for something. Ask for the thing that you actually need, right? Again, think of this like the beginning of a real business. That means you have developed a real strategy. And the strategy dictates that the first thing you need is blah, ask for that thing. If you're ready to ask for money because you believe that the team is there, the financials are there, the plan is sound, you know exactly what's going to happen and what you need to make it happen. If you are that sure that your plan is finished and the next thing you need is money, that's when you ask for money, right? But if you ask for money, prepare to be grilled about every precondition that I just mentioned, right? So if the plan is there, if you're ready to ask for money, even if it's 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, a million, if you're sure of the team, if you have everything you need and the plan is sound, ask for money. But if it's not, you can ask for advice. You can ask for people to share your landing page link. You can ask for people to do all kinds of things that they will do if you achieved a connection, especially at the top when you were telling them what you believe in. And then here, the final slide is generally like the title slide again, but with your social handles so they can connect with you and your contact details. Just a note here, I've got contact details down the bottom. Just a general pitching tip. I know this pitch is going to be digital, so it doesn't matter, but try to put your contact details and social handles at the top of a slide for any in-person pitch, because anyone outside of the front row can't see it down the bottom. I've seen this problem every single year, but it's digital this year. So actually there's an advantage in making full use of the whole slide. And then what people would verbalize while this screen is up and people are taking down their contact details is probably like their big vision, right? So long term, we think that this is going to change the world. It's a callback to the top. So it's a nice circular end to the structure where you spoke about how big the problem was and what you believed in. We believe that this is the best vehicle towards achieving big vision. You know, you could be that confident about it, and the world would be better off because you could remind them of the benefits. You could do whatever you really want there, but a nice big visionary statement to finish there is a really nice thing to say while this slide is up. And that is the end of that slide deck. And I know this is wrapping up at 6. So if anybody wants to stay on, we could just do Q&A, and I've got the group chat in front of me again. Or you can just unmute and talk. That'd be a really welcome thing, to be honest. Just looking at I just quickly want to look at the info pack you've been given. So make sure we've covered everything from a pitching perspective. Okay, so problem worth solving. Absolutely, we've covered that many, many times now. Innovative solution, market, value proposition / competitive advantage, business model and traction, team, pitch. Okay, so just that final point, I think we've absolutely covered everything. in terms of content and different ways you might present it visually. And there have been some tips in there about keeping the slides really light, big images, charts, high-res, etc., high-res graphics, etc., etc. Just in terms of the pitch is really interesting because this is where we talk normally about body language and that sort of thing and the actual presentation style, but it's obviously going to be some sort of Zoom call or webinar or some sort of digital platform this year. So there's not as much, not as much at play. You can't really see my hands. I'm a big hand talker usually. You can't see my stance. You can't see how short I am, so that's good. I can be more imposing than ever before with this low camera angle. Yeah, so body language is like less of a factor, but what still is at play is things like eye contact, voice modulation and intonation. So not speaking in a monotonous voice the whole time and trying to vary it up a bit so you can gather some engagement, etc., etc. Like you can still use voice modulation to keep things interesting. You can vary your volume. You can have pauses to emphasize certain points. You can keep eye contact with the camera, ideally. These are things that you need to consider for pitching in a digital context, which is new to me as much as anyone. Just stuff to be aware of there. So it is important to speak clearly, look at the camera, have eye contact. It's a weird thought. And I'm sure nobody's going to be penalized for anything that goes wrong from that perspective, especially with a digital delivery this year. But it will make you stand out if you're clearly a strong presenter and confident in your material. Remember that none of this is about presentation skills. I did say it's a pitching competition and presentation skills are rewarded, but I also said that confidence and that ability to speak comes from the mastery of your content. And that is the most important thing to remember. So if you are the person who did the work, you spoke to the people, you ran the experiments, you know that everything that you're saying, or most of it, is actually validated in reality, well, no one should be more confident pitching that material than you. So remember that actual public speaking confidence comes from mastery of your content. No one, and I mean no one, invests in Elon Musk's companies because of his public speaking ability. Okay, and yet he has changed the world and the way that we live, and we all look to him as one of the greatest leaders. Go watch one of his speeches. So that's what I'm saying. This is not about public speaking ability for public speaking ability's sake. This is about mastering your content by doing actual real world experiments, getting real world traction, and from that you will find, I promise, the confidence and all the public speaking ability you actually need, especially this year with the digital delivery. Are there any questions? Cool.
Hey, Shahay, can I just add a couple of tips with the presenting now it's on video?
Yeah. It's new to me.
What you'll find is if you stand up, you'll actually have much better energy. So if you stand up when you're doing it, when you're using the computer, make sure that you frame yourself correctly. So you make sure you get the head in the right way, or you're not going down like this. Also look at the light that's behind you and make sure there's really good light on your face as well. And yeah, just a couple of tips. Also look at your background. Have a professional background. If you're pitching, make sure family or your roommates are aware that you're doing it so that you have a nice quiet place and you won't have people interrupting halfway through. It's live, isn't it, Shahay?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Those are really good tips. Yeah, really, really important, especially the standing up one. And forgive me for not standing up for this talk, but it's 3
2
minutes.
hours.
It's not a big ask for you to stand up during the pitch. So that may require a special setup on your part in terms of a tripod and like maybe even an external webcam so you can keep your screen off to the side. Like think about these considerations. That's a really good point. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions, guys? Anybody? Elon Musk, he pitches all the time. He does those like product releases. You should check him out. I actually think he's getting better. I think he's invested in himself.
I have a question about the pitch. So I know the rule now is you cannot go out unless like it's absolutely necessary. So like, what do our group members come together and do it, or like, is it going to be like all of us are going to be at our own homes and doing it? Because that's a bit more complicated when
Oh,
all our group members are.
yeah, definitely. Great question. I think that what I normally would have said, is actually still true. So I would have said have one individual presenting, because it's a really short format and this is not a university assignment. You're not getting marks for each 15 seconds that you all contribute. So have one person who's mastered all of the content, who's listened to all of the different team members. Maybe it's the CEO, maybe it's not, maybe it's somebody else. But whoever it is, let them deliver the whole pitch. So that's one person in one location. And then at most, involve the rest of the group for Q&A, especially if they're a technical expert in their certain area. Get them to field questions about certain things. And then I'm sure whatever solution we have, actually we'll just confirm with Laura now, we'll be able to accommodate that. But you certainly don't need to be in the same location.
Okay.
Yeah. Laura?
Yeah, I would totally agree with Shahe. So we are going to do practices in advance as well. So if you are wanting to try and have two people pitch, we will practice first so that you can see what the outcome of that will be. So we definitely would recommend the one person pitch, and then all of the team will unmute themselves for the Q&A with the judges. So, we'll run it through. There's more details to come, but think about with your team who is best equipped to answer which questions. So do you have a person who is your kind of business finance, and so when you get questions around your the costings or whatever you've proposed, they're the best person to answer that and talk about it as a team in advance, or but we are going to practice so that everybody can feel the flow of it, hopefully more than once, in the right setting prior to the pitch fests.
All right, that's great. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Laura. There's one thing I did say I would cover. So while anyone else thinks of questions, I said, what different ways can you know that a pitch has been successful? And this is really handy outside of the PFC as well, where it's not just a question of who wins and who gets prizes and what have you. So just very quickly, some of the things I look for is, and again, like I've got to think about the digital format, but as I said, these tips are for broader pitching events. So sometimes it's real-time feedback. If you're looking at their expressions, you're seeing them smiling, you're seeing them nodding. It's a lot easier to speak to them, firstly. But it also means they're understanding what you're saying, they're agreeing with you. So it means you probably can move on from that content. They're looking puzzled, they're looking argumentative, they're looking confused, whatever it may be. I would actually adapt my pitch in real time and go over some of that content again, depending on who the person is. If it's one of the judges or one of the most strategic investors that I really want and they're looking puzzled during my pitch, I'll keep going over that content until I've changed their expression. Obviously different ways, not the same thing, because then I'm definitely going to get booted out the door. But the point is, try different things to actually in real time see more positive non-verbal feedback from your audience. The other thing that I would say, and this does apply to the PFC pitching format, is that you definitely judge it by the quality of the questions that you get. So I've seen countless pitches where the first question is like, and from really smart people, like people who were listening to the pitch and could understand it, they'd just be like, so what is it again? Right? Like, just go over the product again for me. Like the most important, right? Not necessarily the most important, as I said earlier, but like they didn't understand the product, right? So what is it again? Would be a terrible pitch feedback, right? Because they're not going to give you feedback in most real pitching environments. You don't go, oh, and how was the pitch, by the way? They're not going to give you that sort of feedback, but their questions will. So if you get questions like, I did write some notes on this for you. So if you get questions like, what is it again? What does it do? How does it work? Who's it for? How big's the market? Think back to what I said earlier about the default questions you expect people to ask. If it's anything that relates to any of those, I would say that the pitch was not effective, right? Instead, what sort of questions is it are more detailed, more advanced, not normal for them to expect you to include in the pitch? Those are the quality feedback questions. So it's for example, they've understood your solution to such depth. They're like, oh, but what checks and balances do you have in place to ensure that, any bad actors are regulated on the platform? So for example, from a safety perspective, if you're some sort of online some sort of sharing economy platform and people are meeting people all the time and exchanging goods, well, how are you preventing anything bad from happening, to those people on those locations when they're meeting each other, right? So it's a really practical, detailed question. Actually, as I thought of that example, I was like, in that particular startup, you probably wanted to cover that, but it wouldn't be a deal breaker if you didn't, and therefore you might get that question, and it's really practical and it's good. But it could be like, what marketing strategies and tactics have worked for you so far? Why doesn't this already exist? That's like the best one. That means they love you. That means like, why hasn't this been done before, right? If they say it that way, it means they love you. If they say it any other way, it's like, are you sure this hasn't been done for a reason, right? Anyway, look at the questions that you're getting. If they're really basic, if you should have answered them in the pitch, it means they're not persuaded, they haven't connected, the pitch probably wasn't effective. If they've connected, why hasn't this existed before? I've wanted this all my life. Can I have your contact details? I've got to put you in touch with my niece. Whatever it may be. Anything that is action, anything that is let's go, I'm going to introduce you to this. Have you spoken to this person? Have you done this? Anything that is action, anything that is super detailed, really positive feedback equals a really successful pitch and a personal connection, because now they're introducing you to family members too. So they clearly trust you. Yeah, so that was the little spiel on how to judge whether a pitch was good. You've got real-time feedback, you've got the questions that you get, and then of course you get any explicit feedback from your actual coaches. So for example, if you're in the Coaching Connect program already at Founders, right, and your coach is in the audience, definitely go up to them, or any of the PFC staff, of course, definitely go up to them and say, what did you think of the pitch? What could I have done better? Take a good piece of feedback, take a constructive piece of feedback, and develop yourself over time. That's what I'd say there. Any other questions? Anyone else want to unmute themselves in the next 10 minutes?
I've got a question for everyone. What was the most memorable pitch you've ever seen at Founders, and why was it memorable?
Mine was the heart assist device I told you about, actually. And I'll tell you why it was the most memorable, because it started with a story about how his own uncle couldn't get the device because the existing product on the market was so expensive. All the public healthcare systems like the NHS in the UK and Medicare here were rationing it out to just a few people, and that his own family member had been excluded from getting the rebate on one of them or being eligible for one of them. So basically that person was being turned away from medical care. And that's what drove this entrepreneur, right? That pitch had everything. It had the villain, although the healthcare systems shouldn't be painted as the villain. Like, what I'm saying is they weren't able to help in that situation. It had the villain, it had the hero, it had a personal connection. It was moving. It was genuinely moving. And then he was the guy who commercialized that thing. So now it's like this personal mission to build something that can save his own family member. Like, it doesn't get much better than that. Does anybody else have an answer, Donna? I don't know why I asked you, Donna. Does anybody else have an answer for Donna?
I think I'm the 10X Accelerator manager, and I've seen, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 500 pitches before. And I think the best pitches are the one, as Shahan mentioned, where people do tell a personal story and somebody who uses emotion to engage the audience, firstly. And secondly, are their authentic selves when they present. So they're not trying to be anybody else when they present. So they're their authentic selves. And I think that resonates really well with audience as well. But a really well-constructed story that hits the key points that Shahe went through are the best types of pitches. And if you can weave in the personal story, so there's a real why as to why you're doing that, why you're doing your startup, and then when the audience or the judges look at you, they can understand that you're probably going to have the legs to actually see this through. Many people come up with an idea because, hey, here's a great idea to make money. I think it's going to be really good. And some of them do work like that, but a startup is very, very difficult. But if you have the personal connection to the problem, you're probably going to have what it takes to be able to actually be really successful with it. So personal, authentic stories, personal stories delivered in an authentic way resonates incredibly well. And Peter with the heart device was definitely one of those. So he was definitely a standout for me as well.
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, that's absolutely right. Does anybody else have an example? No, nobody said Elon Musk. See, I was right.
Can I jump in? Am I live?
Yeah. Yep.
Yep. One of my first and only PFC was last year. The team that won P2X. So their story was very interesting. So they only just snuck in. They were 10th place. They came through like the repechage system to get in, basically because their pitch was very scientific. They were chemical engineers and they spoke as if everyone understood chemical engineering, which I certainly didn't. So they were able to pivot. They were able to rework their pitch so that they understood they were talking to people in the audience that did not know anything about chemical engineering. And so I think it's a really great story to see that that change, the way they changed their tone was enough to take them from kind of 10th to 1st. And they're now doing fantastic things.
That's a perfect example, Gregory. So seeing that pitch and Constantine do it, when they made the pitch more relatable, as you said, and so at the finals night, it was like, we all love a beer. You know, we're scientists, we love a beer. And you know where beer comes from? When breweries make beer, there's this byproduct, which is blah. And I don't remember the science either. I'm sorry, guys. But I'm like, there's this byproduct you may not realize when we're enjoying this favorite pastime. And we found a way to turn this byproduct into hydrogen. You may also not realize that there is a huge and growing market for hydrogen in Australia for research purposes and other purposes. And it was just like, it was great, right? So it was like, we can bond over the fact that we like to be outdoors and drink beer and do these things. Like they were clearly good guys you'd want to have a beer with, you know? So these things are important from a likability perspective, trust building perspective. And then they introduce you to such an important scientific problem and the fact that they've developed a solution to it and worked with the CSIRO people, you know, in that field of research to start to, like, again, like I'll say it doesn't get much better than that again. And that was a PFC pitch just from last year. So anything is possible in terms of what you guys can do by the finals or even the pitch fest. It's a long time away. It's longer than I realized, the pitch fest. There's a lot you can do in that time. But yeah, that was definitely another standout pitch for sure. Anyone else?
I think the other thing as well is everyday language. And some people think about, oh, I can't dumb it down. But in PFC, the everyday language is really important because your audience is really broad. So please don't ever think that you're dumbing it down in an environment like this. If they don't understand the jargon that you're using, they won't actually understand what you're doing. So it's a missed opportunity. So everyday language, and as Shahang Gregory said, make it really, really relatable. And if you can find an example that the whole audience is going to know about, and you can create your story around that, that's a really good way of being able to do it as well. But everyday language for this environment.
Yeah. I would almost advise that in most pitching environments, unless you were pitching for a grant and the grant panel was other scientists, for example. If you're a scientist and you're pitching for the Accelerating Commercialization grant and it's like super high tech people who will understand it, that's the only time where I'd use that jargon. Otherwise, what are you doing? Like, one of the most important functions of a pitch is not just to achieve a connection with the person you're speaking to, but to have that person able to pass on the most salient points of it. Because if they're able to pass it on or talk about it to somebody else, you're getting these network effects. And suddenly more people are being referred to your brand and looking up your landing page and arriving at what you do. So think about that secondary pitch. the viral aspect. Sorry to use that in a pandemic, but like the viral aspect of your pitch is leaving them with a story or a tidbit, just something that they could actually pass on to the next person, make the R coefficient greater than 1. Sorry guys, that's really bad. Phil has raised a point about Yellow Box, which is another PFC. They were actually second place, and then they jumped from that to the 2 years ago, and then they jumped from that into the 10X Accelerator, and now they're doing big things too. So Yellow Box is a physical product, which is a digitally lockable locker that can be installed at beaches and nightclubs and things, so you can leave all your things in it while you go out and live your life, sort of thing. Unlock, pay, lock, all through your app. A really cool physical product. And at the beginning of the PFC, they had very little. They had like a very rough, low fidelity prototype. And by the end of it, they had quite a nice working branded product. And it was sitting on the table next to Vanessa, the presenter. And it was just very compelling. And when she pressed the button, the door opened. And I mean, that sort of thing is very compelling. And that is the sort of advantage I was talking about at the very beginning when I said I think tangible products have an advantage in this competition, especially in the physical years where we've been pitching in rooms. I think they definitely did. It'll be interesting to see what happens now that you could just as easily demonstrate a tech product and make it look real. That's interesting. But yeah, very memorable pitch. Yellow Box was a great team too. So the point is, treat this as a real pitch, treat this as a real startup, take it as far as you can. And if you decide to continue, transition straight into the Founders Program support that exists beyond the PFC. Then there's Coach and Connect, and you get free advice all year round by an experienced business advisor. That's pretty cool. Now that I'm out of the system, I know what that sort of thing costs. So you're getting that for free, guys. If you take it further, and then maybe you'll be a Yellow Box or a P2X or a what was the heart device called, Mel? Oh God, Cardio Bionic. Yeah, a lot of success stories coming out of the Founders Program, and I hope that you will join their ranks. Anyway, I hope this has been useful. I think that if I didn't cover anything, I'll try to get the video to you. I really hope it hasn't messed up because of that dropout, but I can see the first one's like rendering on my computer now. So I'll try to get the videos to you. And if there are any additional questions, I'd be very happy to, if you compile them all, Laura, I could send back like a written response or something. That'd be really good. Happy to do that. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it, everybody, and good luck, and stay indoors, but don't let that stop you from building a real startup. Okay. And if you find me on LinkedIn, that's fine too. And yeah, you're very welcome, guys. I see your messages coming through. Okay. Let's leave it there. I'm almost going to pass out. All right. Bye. Bye, everyone. And good luck. Have a great competition.